Hello everyone, this is my video presentation on my paper for Dr. Little's Family Ministry class. I chose to do my paper on the topic of homeschooling, particularly ministering to homeschooling families within an apostolic Pentecostal setting. I was raised homeschooling myself. I was homeschooled all the way through elementary school, middle school, and high school. In fact, when I went to college was the first time that I was educated in a setting outside of the home. So obviously I have an attachment to homeschooling and I have a passion for the movement. I would like for my own children to be homeschooled. I feel that it's a great approach to education, that it has valuable contributions that it can offer both to the children and to the parents who are educating, and that it has significant contributions it can make within society as well. Obviously, there are many aspects of homeschooling that could be discussed, but for the sake of this paper, I chose to focus a little more specifically on the development of family ministry programs for homeschooling families. Despite the opposition of many public educators to the homeschooling movement, the homeschooling faction of society is one that's rapidly growing, and it's also achieving notoriety as a valid approach to education. As such, it's vital that we find innovative methods to both minister to and support homeschooling families, as well as providing appropriate resources for those who are interested in beginning homeschooling their children. For the sake of this paper, I chose to utilize a three-part methodology composed of what we refer to as the orthos: orthodoxy, orthopathy, and orthopraxy. Orthodoxy is, of course, referring to correct understanding or correct belief concerning a particular topic. Orthopathy is concerning developing correct feelings concerning that particular topic, and orthopraxy is a correct response or correct actions in response to our developed orthodoxy and orthopraxy concerning a particular topic. With this paper, there were several places I had to further refine the methodology, both for working in an apostolic Pentecostal setting, as well as viewing homeschooling through the lens of family ministry. With the orthodoxy aspect of the methodology, it was important to write through a theological lens rather than just viewing homeschooling for its educational value. As apostolic Pentecostals, it's important that our orthodoxy be centered around the kingdom contributions of our actions. The same is, of course, true with homeschooling. It's important that the action of homeschooling be viewed using the methodological framework of its potential contribution to kingdom development, both personally in the lives of the children being homeschooled and in the impact that they will have on the future world. The most difficult aspect of the methodology for me personally to refine was the orthopathy aspect. As I stated previously, I was raised as a homeschooled child. It's the only educational model I was ever acquainted with. As such, my feelings toward homeschooling are somewhat biased, I will admit. Therefore, with the orthopathy method, it was important that I not write with an apologetic voice, advocating homeschooling as the best educational model. It was important that I maintain a more balanced perspective, providing feelings from both sides of the issue. Therefore, it was important for this paper and to the development of the thesis that I focus on the orthopraxy aspect of the methodology. To refer back to my thesis, the point of this paper was to aid in developing innovative methods of ministering to homeschooling families, as well as providing resources for those interested in homeschooling. Obviously, this falls under the umbrella of our orthopraxy concerning homeschooling within the Apostolic Pentecostal movement, as well as within Christianity in general. It's important that the foundation of our orthopraxy is the kingdom nature of homeschooling, as well as the theological contributions to a child's development that stem from their education, whether this education be in the home setting or whether it be in a traditional public education setting. In the course of researching this paper, I discovered many interesting facts about homeschooling, things that even as a homeschooler I was never aware of. The first thing that really stood out to me in my research was the fact that prior to the development of compulsory education laws in the United States, homeschooling was the predominant form of education in the United States. I had assumed that the traditional one-room schoolhouse that we often read about in history books had been the primary form of education. But according to several different researchers whose work I explored, homeschooling was a much more widespread phenomenon than these one-room schoolhouses or other forms of publicly offered education. As we discussed in class this past week, these compulsory education laws came to be during the Great Depression in an effort to remove many teenagers from the workforce to open more jobs for adults. It wasn't until the early to mid 1900s that these compulsory education laws, and along with them the advent of the public education system as we know it today, were really introduced into society. Another interesting fact that I found was the size of the homeschooling movement in the United States. I knew obviously that there were a significant number of people who chose homeschooling as their educational option. However, I didn't realize exactly how many it was. According to one study concerning the demographics of homeschooling, the homeschooling movement in the United States is approximately the size of the Los Angeles and Chicago public school systems combined. If I remember correctly, this number was somewhere between 2 and 3 million children that are homeschooled in the United States. Another interesting aspect of my research that stood out was information regarding the academic preparedness and socialization of homeschooled students as compared to that of their public school counterparts. Many opponents of the homeschooling movement suggest that homeschooled students suffer from a reduced socialization, or that they aren't adequately prepared for education outside of the home, such as in a college or in a graduate school setting. However, in the research I consulted, it became clear that the social preparedness and the academic preparedness of homeschooled students was comparable to, and in many cases better than, the social preparedness and academic well-being of publicly educated students. There were several facts I found in my research that were also very surprising to me. One study in particular came from a gentleman who surveyed 53 adults who had been homeschooled all the way through school. Out of these 53, he found that none were on any sort of government assistance, and higher than average number of those 53 were actually self-employed. This information regarding the contribution to society that is found in students who were homeschooled was quite surprising to me. Another aspect of my research that was surprising came from this same study, when this gentleman found that out of the 53 adults that he surveyed who were homeschooled, 96% of them said that they would choose to be homeschooled again if they were given the option. One researcher, Joseph Murphy, commented on this, and he commented that it's difficult sometimes to even define homeschooling because of the many hybrid methods that are utilized today. These come from hybrids between public schools and homeschools. They come from homeschooling co-ops and several other forms of homeschooling that do not necessarily fall under the commonly held definition of homeschooling, but are still methods of home education. Since this is a peer collaboration assignment, obviously an important part of that is getting feedback from the other students in the class. Therefore, in the interest of making my paper the best it can possibly be, I welcome both the critique and advice of my fellow classmates in further developing and refining my paper. There are a few important aspects of the paper in which I would value the contribution of the other students. The first of those is the incorporation of the methodology throughout the paper. Obviously, I did, to the best of my ability, incorporate the methodology, but I do recognize that there are areas where my incorporation of the methodological framework is lacking in the development of the paper. Therefore, I would welcome any advice on how to better incorporate that aspect of the paper. Another important aspect of the paper's development is developing a proper theological support for homeschooling and for supporting homeschoolers. This, I feel, would be even more valuable coming from those who are outside of the homeschooling movement, who haven't had significant involvement with either homeschoolers or who have not homeschooled themselves. I feel that people with limited exposure to the homeschooling movement would be able to offer a better perspective on the theological need for ministering to homeschooling families better than someone like myself who's had significant exposure. A final area where I would very much value input is on writing from a less apologetic tone and writing with a more unbiased perspective. Again, I was homeschooled, which means that obviously my paper is going to be written from the tone of someone who is a supporter and an advocate of homeschooling. I would value contribution from those who have not been involved in homeschooling to aid in the development of the paper and in writing from an unbiased perspective. The research and writing process of this paper was an invaluable experience for me. Obviously, it is a subject that I'm very passionate about, and I very much valued the opportunity to explore it from an academic perspective. I feel that the contributions of this paper to my future life and ministry will be invaluable. Thank you, and God bless.